I think that the Chimera Engine is one of the best engines to be recently introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh! And in today's video, we combined it with Plunder Patrol. What's up guys, this is tcgsam here, and in today's video, I'm coming at you guys with a Chimera Plunder Patrol deck profile for the post-duelist Nexus format. I think this is an incredibly cool deck with some neat synergies with each other that you may not have expected right away when reading the cards. I also feel like the Chimera Engine is one of the perfect engines to go with the Plunder Patrols because both engines are able to do quite a bit on their own even if you don't see the other one. But once you start combining them with each other, then you're able to put up some really nasty boards that also play around cards like Dark Ruler No More. So with all that being said, let's just hop straight into the video. We're gonna start things off with the Chimera Engine. We're playing 3 copies of Cornfield Kotal just to search us our illusion monsters or Chimera monsters from our deck to our hand. It's just one of the best searchers in the deck, and you want to max out on it because you always want to see the Chimera Engine. We're playing 3 copies of Mirror Swords Knight as well. This is the best starter for the Chimera Engine. We're able to get into our full combo off of either just Cornfield or Swords Knight alone, so you want to max out on these copies. 3 copies of Gazelle, the King of Mythical Beasts. Gazelle is actually pretty solid as a normal summon because you have access to the Fiend monsters needed for Gazelle, the King of Phantom Beasts in your extra deck. All the Plunder Patrols are Fiend monsters. If you're able to normal summon Gazelle and search like Chimera Fusion, then any Plunder Patrol monster plus the Gazelle can sort of turn into like a pseudo combo with like the Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast. Because now you have access to Chimera Fusion in rotation, and you have access to a free illusion monster in your hand off of Gazelle, and you're ripping one from your opponent as well. So a very, very strong normal summon in this deck as well if you do start off with not seeing your Cornfield or your Mirror Swords Knight. And then next up, we're playing 2 copies of Bigwing Engine. I don't think you need 3 in this deck. 3 just doesn't really come up because there are times where you aren't even going through this, since it's important to note that Bigwing Engine actually does lock you into fusion summoning for the rest of the turn. So unless you specifically have like a handful of Plunder Patrols and like your 1-card combo, then you're probably not going to summon this a lot of the time, since you want to end with like Blackbeard as well. So that's why I said like a card like Gazelle is incredibly good as a normal summon, because this helps you get Chimera Fusion while it's not locking you into anything, so you can still do your other Plunder Patrol like Synchro and Link plays. Speaking of Chimera Fusion, we are playing 3 copies of Chimera Fusion. This is probably one of the sickest fusion spells to come out recently. Chimera Fusion in this deck is very good because all it requires you is to use a Fiend or a Beast, and since all the Plunder Patrols are Fiend, hypothetically, even if you don't see any of your Chimera Engine, you can still use this to put up a Plunder Patrol ship list as a disruption, or go into your fusions like Guardian Chimera or make them the reliever. So incredibly strong card that you definitely want to max out on. And then moving on to the Plunder Patrol engine now, we are playing 3 copies of Whitebeard. Whitebeard is the best Plunder Patrol because every time it's sent from field or hand to the graveyard, you special summon a Plunder Patrol monster from your deck. It is important to remember though that Whitebeard, like Baphomet, has an effect that specifically locks you into only summoning certain type. In Whitebeard's case, you can only special summon Plunder Patrols for the rest of the turn. So it's important to balance out when you're using which engine and playing around those restrictions on both of the engines, which if you guys are interested in seeing, I will be having a test hand / combo tutorial video for this deck coming out in the next coming days, so do stay tuned for that. You'll be able to see me go through a couple of different test hands and showcasing you how you can sort of play around the restrictions that are on Bigwing Engine and Whitebeard. But Whitebeard definitely is the one you want to max out on because it's a tuner as well. Golden Hair is also probably one of the best ones in this deck specifically, because a lot of the times your normal summon is going to be committed to the Chimera Engine, whether it's Gazelle or a Mirror Swords Knight. So you want to be able to get your Plunder monsters out onto the board still, and Golden Hair's effect is perfect for that. Being able to send a Plunder Patrol from your hand to the graveyard or field to the grave to special summon it, and then in the graveyard it can recur itself as well as a tuner by discarding a Plunder Patrol, and then from there you can go into your Plunder Patrol plays, which is really nice. You definitely want to max on this one in this deck specifically, just because we're not normal summoning the Plunder Patrols as often. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of Bluebeard. You can make an argument to cut Bluebeard down to 2, because Bluebeard is only good if you specifically have a Plunder on the board, and sometimes you aren't going to be able to get to a Plunder on the board with this deck, but I think Bluebeard's effect is actually very strong because it pairs pretty well with the Chimera Engine, which you'll see more of in the test hand video, but I'll just say that Bluebeard can discard cards like Mirror Swords Knight from your hand from when you, let's say, don't start with Mirror Swords Knight. You can still get it into the graveyard with Bluebeard's effect while you either link it, synchro it, or fusion it all away. Then getting Mirror Swords Knight into the graveyard means you have a monster interruption with your Gazelle, the King of Phantom Beasts, which is incredibly strong. And then next up, we are playing 3 copies of Black Eyes. So Black Eyes is also one of the ones that you want to see because if you're fusing away, let's say your Plunder Patrols or you're like synchroing, linking them away, this is just a great extender to add one back from your graveyard and special summon itself out as a body on the board for more of your Plunder Patrol plays. So definitely want to max out on this one as well. The only, I guess, real Plunder Patrol we aren't maxing out on is Redbeard. I think 1 is more than enough. This card isn't very good on its own. It's great when you have access to a Whitebeard to summon it from deck, for example, or if you fuse it away early, you have the King of Phantom Beasts to summon it back from the graveyard, since it is a fiend monster, and then tag out into a ship on your opponent's turn, which could be really nice. But most of the time, you don't want to see Redbeard in your opening hand, so I think playing 1 is fine. And then next up for the Plunder Patrol spells or traps, we are playing 3 copies of Shipyard. So Shipyard is probably the best Plunder Patrol card in this deck, since you're able to get a Plunder Patrol into the graveyard, which means either a card like Golden Hair or Bluebeard that can help you draw cards to either dig deeper into your Chimera Engine or make it easier for you to actually play with your Chimera Engine, because like I mentioned, there is a weird thing with this deck to where sometimes you will have to give up your normal summon for your Plunder Patrols, and you want ways to get Plunder Patrols onto the board, so that you're going to do that by searching cards like Golden Hair or dumping cards like Golden Hair to the graveyard, and Shipyard just helps facilitate that really easily. And then finally, I'm playing 1 copy of Plunder Patrol Booty. You definitely don't have to play this. I think this could be a nice search target. In hindsight, you probably could cut this because it hasn't really come up for me when I played the deck. You could probably play a copy of Terraforming or something just to see Plunder Patrol Shipyard a little bit more often. But I personally just like having the option of going for this in certain game states because it's incredibly strong and can very easily just outpace your opponent with a card like this. And then for the non-engine of this deck, you can play anything you want in these slots, but very specifically, I'm going to talk about Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon. So Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon has a little bit of extra synergy in this deck because if you're starting with a card like Mirror Swords Knight, this card itself dodges Impermanent Veiler, but a card like Bigwing Engine is probably the most vulnerable card in the strategy to a card like Impermanent Veiler. You have the option to chain these on your Bigwing Engine to make sure it resolves, because it doesn't matter if it's face down or not, you still get to search and then you can still fuse away with it later. And then that makes it so you're able to actually resolve your Chimera combo through hand traps sometimes, which is incredibly strong because a single Mirror Swords Knight can sometimes just win a game on its own. So being able to resolve that guaranteed is incredibly strong and definitely a reason why you should play these. It's also, of course, very good against some of the top decks of the meta like Pearly and Kashtira. You're able to just shut down their monsters and have a lot easier of a time. The downside to playing cards like this, however, is since you are drawing cards on your opponent's turn, either with Blackbeard or Guardian Chimera, you aren't going to be able to use these after you draw them, so you're not really going to have hand traps you can throw at your opponent on top of your regular board. But I think that's a concession that's worth making because these cards are just so strong. And finally, Infinite Permanence. You can negate cards like a Rise Heart when going second, which is huge, and it just helps you play through board sometimes by just forcing out your opponent's interruptions. So definitely want to consider playing these cards specifically, but like I mentioned, you can play any non-engine in the slot that you want. Moving on to the extra deck, we are playing 2 copies of Blackbeard. You could make an argument for 3, but I think 2 is probably sufficient because you have a very good grind game with the Chimera Engine already. You don't necessarily need to go through 3 Blackbeard for your grind game anymore. So I think 2 Blackbeard is fine because we cut it down to play some other cards in the extra deck. Probably do want to play like 2 copies of the ships that you're taking out into just so you have targets to actually go for. This card is also very good because you make one in your opening combo since you're able to guarantee your opponent having a certain attribute on the board, which is really nice. Even though it puts itself back in the extra deck, I still think you want to have 2 copies just so you never run out of targets for your Plunder Patrol monsters in your extra deck, which is for one of the problems you might run into with Plunder Patrols. If you just start running out of ships to tag out into, your deck just doesn't do anything. Next up, we're playing 2 copies of Mork. Same idea with your you want to have multiple copies in your extra deck just so when you're grinding, then you're able to actually have targets to summon into with your Plunder Patrols. And then 2 copies of List. So List actually is not only the best one to go into turn 1, you're also able to actually make it with the Chimera Fusion, since all it takes is 2 Plunder Patrol monsters and all of them are fiends, so you can use Chimera Fusion with them. You could sometimes go into lists, and then lists can be like an extender if you want to do like heavier Plunder Patrol plays, or if you only have Chimera Fusion as the Chimera Engine in your hand and only Plunder Patrol cards as your other engine. And then playing 1 copy of Plunder Patrol Ship Brand, I don't think you need 2. This is not a bad card by any means, but it just probably won't come up that much because fire is not only a very sort of uncommon attribute, with only Ash Blossom really being a common fire monster that you're going to see in the meta nowadays. Its back removal also is good only against like certain specific decks, so I think 1 is probably sufficient. Great Almirage. The only reason you're playing this is because it turns Golden Hair into a 1.5 card Blackbeard, because you can just normal summon Golden Hair, turn this into Almirage, discard a card for Golden Hair, make Blackbeard, and then at least you have your engine rolling even with a really bad hand. So I think Almirage is pretty good for that reason. And then for the fusions that we're going into with our Chimera Engine, 2 copies of Chimera, the King of Mythical Beasts. So Chimera is incredibly strong in this deck. It not only rips one from your opponent's hand, but it also turns on cards like Cornfield Codal and Mirror Swords Knight in your graveyard as additional interruptions. But its last effect is also very relevant in this deck because you can bring back any Beast, Fiend, or Illusion monster in your graveyard, and since all the Plunder Patrols are Fiends, that means you can start bringing back cards like Whitebeard and Redbeard for additional tag outs during your opponent's turn. You can bring out cards like Blackbeard, which is kind of crazy. Once you are able to bring Blackbeard out onto the board, that's another ship that you can turn into and draw a card at the same time, which is just honestly crazy how much this one single card does for this deck. And of course, the effect to rip a card from your opponent's hand is nothing to scoff at either. We're playing 1 copy of Chimera the Illusion Beast. So this is the card I cut the Blackbeard for. I don't think you necessarily have to run it, but I like having the option of it just to make your Chimera Fusion a little bit more flexible. You have the option to go for an OTK play if your hand is right and the conditions are right on the board. So you can play this over the 3rd Blackbeard if you so choose. And then we're playing 1 copy of Magnum the Reliever, just a really great fusion target to go into with your Chimera Fusion. It's an incredibly strong disruption that can be triggered anytime with your Blackbeard specifically, or your Chimera in the graveyard. So its pop effect is pretty much always going to be alive. And then finally 1 copy of Guardian Chimera, and it's one of the best disruptions out there because it's so hard for your opponent to play around when you're chain blocking it. So that's going to do it for the deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. If you guys want to see that test end video, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe so you don't miss it. But with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.